working with this, now again, the perception of what makes hair look thicker or fuller. A lot of people will say it's the baseline, and so keeping a lot of weight down at the baseline. And there is some truth to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you just have all one length, which I was taught, and I'm sure many of you were also taught, that the best option to make hair look and feel thicker and fuller is focusing on the perimeter and the baseline, making sure that that stays full. And to do that, less or no layering, so you have more of a one length shape, so you have that baseline is as full as possible. There is some truth to it. A nice full baseline can definitely make the hair look and feel thicker and fuller. But layering, fine or thin hair gets very heavy very quickly. So any added length, meaning no layering, hair that falls all the way down to the baseline, the perimeter, on a shorter mid-length or longer shape, can actually make the hair look very flat, be very flat, not get volume, which there can also make the hair look and feel even thinner. You can start to see the scalp, the hair becomes transparent, you start to see the scalp, and then again, the hair looks and feels very thin. So my argument is for layering, is that layering by definition, when you're talking hair cutting, layering is always referred to a removal of weight. Layering is more of a redistribution of weight. So yes, layering is going to remove weight in certain areas, but it's going to create weight in others. So by having some layering, strategically where you place your layering on the head, you can remove weight from one area and redistribute it to somewhere else. And again, with finer thinning hair, you want to build up weight, you want to create some volume. As much as most people are looking for as much volume as possible, but setting realistic expectations as far as how much volume you're going to get with a fine or thinning client is going to be your job. So creating expectation, but again, so we're going to talk a little bit about layering and maintaining a strong baseline, as well as promoting weight and volume up and around the top of the head. Okay, so we're going to talk that right now. So I am going to section her off here. How many of you out there, I'll ask you a question in your experience, how many of you have thinning and or fine hair clients on a daily basis? Because I do. I will have clients regularly that have fine thinning hair. And again, it's something that we deal with again on a daily basis. On some cases more severe than others. Again, I have a few clients that have dealt with alopecia. Which is can be a very traumatic experience. I have clients that deal with like autoimmune diseases, that have a lot of hair loss. Again, stress or traumatic experience is a huge factor. So, but yeah, it's something we deal with on a daily basis. What's your experience like? How often are you dealing with fine and or thinning clients? So I'm going to start by setting up, I have my baseline here, and there is a lot of texturizing in here. So again, this is a good model, this is a good palette, because we already have a lot of weight removal, particularly down in here, towards the mid-length and baseline. So I have a baseline established, and it already has a little bit of transparency in it. So in this case, this is a case where you would want to find visually where that transparency is and where the hair starts to become a little more dense. And then that's where you want to establish. So I'm going to reestablish a new baseline based on the weight removal that already has happening through the ends here. So I'm just going to start. Find that transparency, and you can use your comb. Again, if you have a contrasting colored comb with your contrasting to the color of the hair, you can use that to see where the transparency is, when you start to, where you see through the hair, and when the density starts to the transparency becomes more opaque. So you can use it, or you can even use the back your hand. But find that transparency. I'm going to use little to no tension. And if you notice, I am actually cutting on dry hair. When cutting fine or thinning hair, I tend to work on the hair dry. Reason being, because when the hair is wet, depending on how much moisture you're working with, consistent moisture levels, and it can be very tricky to know exactly how much to take, and especially when you're dealing again with weight removal, that can be very, very tricky. So I like to work on dry hair typically. So just establishing a new baseline, and now how short you take this, is going to depend on of course, the client's preferences, as well as the severity of the thinning and or fineness of their hair. So in a lot of cases, some people will take it, to above the shoulders, because being above the shoulders can really make hair look and feel thicker, especially when you have thinning hair around the hairline can be the weakest density across the whole head. So that line there that falls in front of the ears can be really tricky, and so going above the shoulders can really start to make the hair look and feel thicker. And then the shorter you go, the hair can look thicker and thicker. Again, depending on your client, as well as the client's preferences, because I have clients that they want to preserve as much length as possible.
You have a question.
I have a question. Shoot.
But if you do a haircut on dry hair, is it better to be blow dried and cleaned prior to the cut?
That's a great question. So the question was, if I'm cutting on dry hair, do I prefer the hair to be clean and dried first? Yes. Whenever I do a lot of dry cutting behind the chair, and I would say almost always, 90% of the time, cut the hair. If I'm going to do a dry cut, I wash, blow dry style. The way that they naturally wear their hair, whether it's for natural texture or straight and smooth, I will style the hair appropriately before I do my cut. That is a great question. Thank you. So again, I have clients that have thinning or fine thinning hair, and they want to, because it feels fine and thin, they want to feel like they have a lot of hair. So they always want to preserve length. It's always, I want more. And you have to explain to them, more is not necessarily better. In their case, going a little shorter can really make the hair look and feel thicker and fuller. So the longer hair gets, the more transparent it will become. So it's the principle of volume, where so the shorter the hair, the more space fills up that particular space. If the length is here, that's more space that the hair density has to try to fill up. So the shorter hair goes, that's less space that the hair has to fill, if that makes sense. So sometimes having that tough conversation, and for you to be honest with your client that, again, I understand you want to preserve length, but your best look or best option is going to be a bit shorter. So have that conversation, be honest with your clients, be delicate as well, because it can be a very traumatic experience. Okay, so another thing when creating a baseline, sometimes we can work with graduation to build up weight. So you can use graduation at the perimeter to help just build up weight ever so slightly, because again, a perfect one length hair can become, even when it's cut totally one length at 0 degrees, it can still sometimes look a little thin or fine. So again, layering is a redistribution of weight, graduation is a buildup of weight. So you can use, if you take a vertical section, and you can just elevate this out, keep it low. Again, graduation is anything within, say, we use 45 degrees. I would say it's very rough. None of us know what 45 degrees really is. So we don't have a protractor when we're breaking with part of our toolkit, but I don't know if a protractor is the right tool. I'm just making stuff up at this point as far as our tools. So, but taking a vertical section and elevating that up just slightly. Again, you can see where our baseline is here, right? Here's our angle. This is at one length, essentially. If I just elevate this up, we have a little bit of a corner. You can just soften that corner. And now we create a little bit of graduation, and that can help just build up just a little bit of weight at the perimeter and actually make it feel a little thicker and fuller and take away some of that transparency. Again, there's a lot of do's and don'ts that we hear, or there's a lot of don'ts that, to be honest, when we're in our industry. There's a lot of don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that, avoid this. I am not one of those people to tell you not to do something. I am a do it. See what happens. Find out for yourself. It's not about what you don't do. It's about knowing what's best practices, knowing what's best for your clients and what the outcome is going to be. What is going to be the result? So I'm just going through vertical sections, just slightly elevating the hair up, and just again, removing that corner a little bit. Okay, we're creating a slight graduation, building up weight ever so slightly to help remove some of that transparency. Another option is using the blade. Now, the blade, again, one of the things you're told not to do. Don't do it, right? Don't use the blade on fine hair or thinning hair. Now, of course, the density and how fine the hair is, how much thinning is happening, is going to determine when you use this tool. Okay, if it's too severe, then yes, I would say it's probably not the best tool. But in a lot of cases, the razor can be an amazing tool for fine and or thinning hair. Reason being is because a lot of fine hair can be, sometimes it's very straight. It has very little texture to it, natural wave or curl pattern. So it can be very straight. And what that can do is if you just cut blunt lines, especially if you're dealing with like layering, blunt lines you can see. A lot of times you can see every little layer, every cut that's within there. So the razor creating just a soft, textured, feathered end can do two things. One, it can make the haircut feel very seamless. And two, if we remove weight from the ends, it starts to push weight into the interior. So, and again, I'm going to demonstrate and talk about some of the proper usage of the techniques I'm going to use with the razor. But as far as the baseline that we're referring to, you can definitely use the blade and do a skimming technique. So if I comb the hair down at natural fall, use very little tension or elevation, no elevation, very little tension, and this is the feather razor. It has the guarded blade. If you're not familiar, it's got the guarded blade, and the guard actually creates, helps create a little bit of, instead of as opposed to a straight razor, or an unguarded blade, you're able to do this technique, and it's just, I'm holding the blade just like so, right? And if you, for those of you who are not familiar, if you're using a feather razor or a guarded blade, the exposed side of the razor should be facing you. So there's you can see the exposed side of the blade, and then this side you have the guarded side of the blade. So the guarded side of the blade should be in contact with the hair. The exposed side of the blade should be facing you. Okay. So I'm holding the blade just like so, and just very shallow skim. And this removes a little bit of length and weight at the same time. And again, the density is going to determine when to use this tool or not. But you absolutely can use this tool. And again, what the razor can do for you on finer thinning hair is it can create weight, push weight into the interior. And that, again, especially is true when we're dealing with layering. Again, creating a nice, soft textured line. So again, a shorter, more shallow skim, meaning just here, as opposed to a longer skim. Again, the longer skim, the more weight removal. The shorter, you're still going to achieve that unique texture that the blade creates, but you can still create a pretty solid, clean line with just the blade. So don't be afraid to try the razor on fine hair. Again, the palette that you're working on is going to determine whether this is a good tool for you or not. But what I will say is absolutely give it a try, because it is an amazing tool and can create great results. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show a little bit of layering. And I'm going to start by using my razor. So, what I'm going to be doing, whenever you're layering finer thinning hair, again, it is important to keep a certain amount of density down at the baseline, right? So if we layer too much, we can affect our baseline. But to not layer at all is to create flatness and the hair feel no volume through the top, where everyone wants volume. So when you're layering, you want to use, I like to use essentially a round layer, okay? And I'm only working essentially above the round of the head. You could do a square layer, right? Flat through here. But what tends to happen with that is when it falls, you create a corner that can fall very heavy, where a nice just rounded layer throughout the top, essentially so you're following the head shape, falls very nice and still encourages volume. So I'm just working above the round of the head. Again, so all that hair, because I don't want anything that's going to potentially affect my baseline. So if you layer this too much, so essentially my baseline is down here, right? And that's right about at the round of the head. So I'm going to elevate up, working with hair just above the round of the head. So I'm going to show you with the razor, and I'm going to be using a peeling technique. So just ever so softly, I'm sandwiching the hair in between the razor and my thumb. And again, you can only do this with the guarded blade, but I'm not squeezing. I'm the blade is just resting there. My thumb is just resting there, and I'm just going to, I'm coming in at a slight angle, meaning the blade is coming in at an angle here. I'm not like this, coming in at a slight angle, and just creating a nice, soft, textured line. So. Now the other thing you could do is you could point cut, and a lot of people ask what's the difference between using this technique, the razor, as well as point cutting. What's the difference between those two? Point cutting, again, depending on the texture, and this is where I feel like texture comes into play, meaning the diameter of the hair and whether or not there is any natural wave or if it's straight. Again, point cutting, I feel like it creates a textured line, but again, the razor creates more softness and on the ends, a little bit more weight removal. Point cutting just creates a jagged line. The razor creates a feathered line and again pushes weight more into the interior. So just working around the head, letting anything fall out that I don't want to affect my baseline. Continue working with just a round layer.
Can you go over again why you use the razor on dry hair?
Okay, so this is using the razor on dry hair. Great question. So, again, the main benefit. So I'm cutting this dry. Again, I cut fine or thinning hair dry a lot because, again, to really see the outcome, see where the layering happens. And again, having moisture in the hair on finer thinning hair can give you a misconception of the actual density. So that being said, using the razor on dry hair, something that you're told not to do throughout your career, is something I love to do because for that similar reason is I have total control and immediate visibility of my weight removal and the texture that I'm creating. So the more moisture that's present in the hair, the less control you have of your weight removal. Again, the razor being a tool that creates texture and removes weight. When hair has, the more moisture present in the hair, the more hair bunches and gathers up, which will give you less control of your weight removal and the texture you create. So dry hair is a great palette, especially on thin or fine hair, to really control your weight removal. Now the other thing, the key factor when using the blade on dry hair, and this is the thing that people, why people tell you not to use the razor on dry hair, is because they say, what? They usually say it creates frizz. The razor does not create frizz. There's two factors. Razor can create frizz. I won't say it doesn't. I'll say it can. But there's two key factors that can create frizz when using the razor. One, fresh blades. I will tell you the amount of times I'm teaching a class and using the razor, and I'll ask people, I will see them physically just sweating because they're trying to, saw through that hair. The hair should just melt off with a nice fresh blade. So, and I'll ask them, when did you change your razor last? They're like, I don't know, like maybe a couple months ago. And that is insane. You should be changing it every haircut, if not multiple times throughout your haircut. I will go through 1 to 3 blades in a single haircut. So, fresh blades. Please use fresh blades because again, if you're not changing your blades enough, then yes, the blade can potentially create frizz because it's not making a clean cut, and that has to do with the second factor, which is the fabric of the hair, the cuticle layer. So if that cuticle layer is raised and is not prepared well, that blade will really just scratch the surface of the hair, the cuticle. So if that cuticle is raised, you create a rough surface, and then what you start to do is actually, it's like scaling a fish. And what you get, you shred the cuticle off, the hair looks frizzy, You're creating more porosity, so you're damaging the hair if you haven't prepared the fabric properly. So those are the two key factors. If you got those things done, you can absolutely use the razor on dry hair. The other thing, so there's two ways to prepare the fabric, and that is chemically, meaning like an acidic pH level, treatment. Shinefinity, I use a ton of Wella Shinefinity gloss as gloss and toners because it has that acidic pH, so it really seals down that cuticle layer. You can also use like a beautiful blow dry. Proper liquid tool selection and blow drying, smoothing down that cuticle layer. You can definitely use the razor on dry hair. So I am going to switch to my scissors. So what I want to show this with, again, layering with the razor, is that this is very soft and seamless. You don't see the layers happening, right? But what you get is you get a redistribution of weight to start to push weight and create volume up through the top of the head, which is what every client wants with finer thinning hair. So I'm going to show you cutting with the scissors.
How would you modify? How would you modify this cut for a male or someone who wants a more manly look?
So what I'm doing now, I'm focusing more so on not necessarily the haircut itself per se, but I'm talking more about the principles within and techniques. So, that's asking how to make this feel more manly. I don't know that this cut is necessarily for, it can definitely be for a man, but as far as like being more manly, I don't know that my focus on this cut specifically is really about, it's more about the techniques and principles within. What manly is something different to everybody, to be honest. So, I know plenty of men with a haircut like this, and they're manly as hell. So, how to make this haircut particularly look more manly? I guess it's all on who you are and how you wear it. But one of the things you could do is you could really make this kind of rocker shag, and create a real shorter, squared layer. Give them a really cool, like, moppy fringe and go just full rock star mode with it. That's an option. So as we work our way around, see if I make it through this thing, if I don't die first. Welcome to my education cozy corner. Nice tight fit. It's not called that, but maybe I will call it that. If I survive this. So, again, working just above the round of the head, I'm cutting a blunt line with my scissors, just to show the difference between the two sides. So you can kind of see the razored side feels a bit more seamless. You don't necessarily see those layers, but they exist. And you really start to get some volume in there, okay? Our scissor side again, based on the density and the texture, it's still it's going to be softer, but you can see a bit more of your line in there. Which, again, if that's what you want, by all means, go for it. Cut a straight blunt line. But I wanted to show you where the razors versus scissor. But again, both of these outcomes can start to create volume through the top. Now, one of the last things we're going to do is talk fringe. Because a fringe can be a really great way. Again, the hairline is usually almost always the weakest part of the density on the head with fine or thinning hair. So talk a little bit about fringe options before we wrap this up. Okay? So talking about a fringe, you know, again, with finer thinning hair, they get a lot of times a lot of baby hairs. There's a recession area. They get a lot of breakage. So sectioning is going to be important. A lot of times people want to, you know, to try to make a fuller, thicker fringe, they'll travel further back, section further back on the head. That may not necessarily be the ideal. So again, it's you know, you're gonna have to use your discretion, but it's gonna be about finding that balance of the creating fullness and not taking away. So again, if you go too far back or you section too wide, the hair can look and feel thicker. Excuse me, thinner. Because what you're trying to do is fill up that line. Again, using a fringe, say if it's here, whatever the length is, you're trying to fill that up, make it feel fuller and thicker. What you're actually doing, again, you're creating this, all this has to come forward, and you start to create almost potentially a comb-over effect. So start smaller section first, and you can always build that up. Forward a little bit here. So I'm starting with a triangular shaped section, and it's a very wide base triangle. And what I'm not doing is I'm not going into the hairline too much. I'm going into the recession area. And again, what happens a lot with finer thinning hair is you get a lot of those a weak recession, you get all those little baby hairs in there. So you don't necessarily want to cut around those and go too wide. So stay out of the hairline here. Keep it a bit more narrow first, and you can always go a bit wider. But in most cases, you're not going to want to go too wide at all. So start, more narrow. Start a little more shallow. You can always go further back. So again, I'm going to create a little bit of a longer, more textured, soft fringe. So if you go too blunt,
will this be saved? This video?
yes, this video will be saved. I'm going to save the video once I wrap up here, and you will find it here on Wella Education's Instagram page. So again, I'm going to show the razor and the scissors. Now, one of the things with the razor you have to be careful with, because on thinning or fine hair, sometimes if it's too fine, it doesn't have the structure. Meaning there's no interior, there's no, very little cortex, there's no medulla, there's no inner structure to the hair. So the hair has very little elasticity. If you feel it sometimes, so it gets stretched and it'll just break with any bit of tension. So, and that can happen a lot with finer thinning hair. So be aware of that anytime you're using the razor, but again, on finer thinning hair, there is a possibility that hair just doesn't have that elasticity. So I'm using, again, why have I been using the razor? To create texture, a softness, and to push weight into the interior. Here we have our scissors. Again, I'm doing one side versus the other, and I'm just slightly elevating this up. Again, when we elevate, we create a little bit of graduation. Again, so it can fill in that line there. If you just go minimal elevation, you create more one length, which is just a different effect, right? So it's about knowing the outcome. Again, the more we elevate something, so if we're elevate a fringe up here, we're pulling that 90 degrees off the head shape, and that's going to be a much, much softer line. So keeping their elevation quite low. Again, I'm using a slight elevation, and it just creates a little bit of subtle graduation. And I am point cutting here. So whenever I'm cutting a fringe on thinning or fine hair, I prefer something a little longer, something softer, as opposed to just down and blunt, something that hits above the eyebrows. I prefer something a little longer, something that kind of can be worn down and just frame the face and be very soft. Again, you don't want to go too wide with it. Keep it more narrow. And what you can do is just, when the hair's at a natural fall here, you can just, so I've created the foundation of my fringe. And now, I can just incorporate anything that falls into it. So, use my razor for this side here. Again, just come there, natural fall, seeing where it falls, and just incorporating that into my fringe, letting the hair texture and the head shape sort of dictate my fringe as far as the width of it and how far back on the head it travels. So I like a nice little, again, a little bit of a longer fringe. Something that just has a lot of softness to it. You can go a little bit shorter than this if you want. You can have a little longer, more curtainy, but I think using the face shape based on the density and the texture, I would say anywhere from about, quarter of the eye to, around the cheekbone, mid cheekbone, just above the jawline is a good length for, typically, for fine to thinning hair. So, as far as the haircut's concerned, again, this is not, I didn't want to necessarily show you a specific haircut, what's best. I want to talk about the principles. So again, we talked about the baseline. We talked about layering. What is layering? Again, it's a redistribution of weight. So where you remove weight, you build up weight somewhere else. We talked about using graduation, very slight graduation at your baseline. We talked about layering, keeping your layering above the round of the head, so it doesn't affect your baseline. Again, it doesn't remove weight from any further weight from your baseline. The other thing, texture. So if you have a shape like this, or shorter, anything in here, texture can be your best friend. So meaning, add texture. Use styling products. Styling, liquid tools and hot tools, using a curl iron, using a flat iron. And just put some bend in it. Put a little bend in there, but leave the ends a bit more straight. So if you do like the beach wave, for instance, create that wave and then have it smoother towards the ends. It's a great way to add volume and while still maintaining your integrity at the baseline and just a lot of volume and a lot of movement. So texture can be your best friend.